Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Very good morning, and you're welcome to the Signpost programme this morning. We hope you're keeping safe and well, and a reminder that the Signpost Series is brought to you by Teagasc Connected in association with the Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network and Food Drink Ireland. And this morning, we're going to be discussing nitrogen and ways that we can reduce nitrogen. And we know that there are ambitious targets set out under the National Climate Action Programme to reduce our reliance on artificial nitrogen. We continue today showcasing the alternative sources of nitrogen, and I'm delighted to be joined by Donal Patton, who's a research officer in Ballyhaise. Good morning, Donal.
Morning, Mark.
Donal, you're very welcome. And good morning, Padraig. How are you today?
Good, thanks, Mark.
So, Donal, you're going to be giving us some insights into the work that you're doing in Ballyhaise and more specifically around the systems assessment of clover. Donal, maybe just before we get into the presentation, you could tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in Ballyhaise.
Yeah, so look, I suppose I'm a research officer. I'm based in Ballyhaise since 2008. And I've been basically over the research program there. So in 2005, a dairy research program, I suppose an extension of the Moore Park program, Mark, was set up in Ballyhaise. I got involved in 2008. Initially, when I started kind of as a farm manager, and then that changed in 2017. So Barry Riley kind of took on my job, and I took on the research role. So I suppose on my end of it, I'll be dealing with discussion groups coming in, going out to the groups, and then running the actual research program.
So Donal, I'll hand straight over to you, and we will chat to you after the presentation.
Yeah, that's no problem. Look, just before we start off, I'd like to acknowledge Barry there and Brendan Horan, who's great support from Moore Park, and obviously the lads that do the work on the farm. So look, I suppose from the outset, I wanted to just do a quick bit of a background. I haven't been on this before, so just to give people who are maybe not that familiar with Ballyhaise, it's a very quick run through in terms of the background and the overall research program. Then we'll have a quick introduction to the farm. And then I suppose what we spend the bulk of our time talking about is the current trial that just started last year. Yeah, so in terms of the program, as I said there earlier, the program started in 2005. The reason, I suppose, why it started was that Moore Park, where it was, there was a large part of the country or farmers in the country who, for certain reasons, I suppose land quality being the main one, didn't see it that relevant to what they were doing themselves. So in that mid-2000s, the decision was made, look, we need to have a research farm somewhere further north. So Ballyhaise was picked as a site, I suppose, because the farm was there. The college farm was there, and we utilised that. So I think John Kelly was on last week, so he would have sort of gone through a bit on the education side and that. So the way I kind of explain this to people is we get to piggyback on the college farm to a certain degree, to run research, to run trials. So it's been going over that period. So you can see the sort of region, the BMW region that we service. It's 50% of the land, but it's only 25% of the milk. And them figures may have changed a little bit, I would say, in the last number of years, because it's quite a bit of expansion actually here in the Midlands. So, percentages may have changed a little bit. But we're in an area that would be less intensively farmed, I suppose, than the southeast. On top of that, I would say as well, look, we're representing that region, but I know from over the years dealing with discussion groups coming in, look, we get groups from Kerry, we get groups from Cork, we get groups from Tipperary, we get groups from all over the country. And, depending on the part of that particular county or the particular farm that people are on, some people would say that what Ballyhaise is doing is a bit more relevant, or the land type is more relevant to them, even though they're in the south or the southeast. So look, we get people from all around, and I suppose we've missed that over the last couple of years with COVID. Prior to that, we'd get anywhere from 35 to 40 groups a year. And we'd usually, from July to September, October, we tend to get more groups down south. So hopefully it has started up, since restrictions have been lifted, we've had a lot of groups in the last couple of months. So that's welcome. Look, this is just a bit of stuff, I suppose, a bit of background of the locality that we're in. This is George Ramsbottom did this in 2015. So look, in general, in that area or that part of the country, stocking rates are lower, not as big a push on grazing. I suppose traditionally, a lot of people in the area would look maybe more towards the Northern Irish system, would see grazing maybe as not as relevant. So look, you can see it there in terms of the grazing season length and pasture harvested is lower, and that as sort of you'd expect, that translates into lower profitability. So from the outset, when we started, and previous stuff from, let's say, National Farm Survey data would sort of show that as well, that in this part of the world, definitely shorter grazing seasons, and to a degree it's understandable, longer winters, a slower growing season, all that sort of stuff. So that's the background of where we started off in Bally's. And I suppose the couple of big questions, look, we've done a lot of different things over the years, but the couple of big questions in the background all the time, and still those questions are still there, is, can we grow? What sort of tonnage of grass can we grow? And then growing it is one thing, but can we get out and utilize it in the shoulders of the year? Because that was always the challenge. So look, and I suppose, as I said there, the research focus over the years we've done, generally speaking, the type of stuff we do, it's not, it's systems type trials, because there's myself and Barry and the lads working on the farm, but it's not, we wouldn't be doing very detailed stuff like what we'd be doing in Moore Park. But research systems were basically taking the Moore Park blueprint, if you want to put it that way, and initially we dropped it into County Cavan on drumlin type soils and followed it through. So look, at the things that we've looked at over the years, basically grass growth and utilization is a big part of that, putting a realistic level on what's possible to grow on that soil type in that area. Then, grazing management and wet soils, and we've run actually the previous trial to this, we looked at grazing season length and ways that you can utilize grass in the shoulders on those soil types. So look, I suppose there'll come up questions about that later, but that's been a big part of it. Calving patterns, stocking rate, and I suppose in the background always we've, profitability has a big part to play. I didn't mention there at the start, but look, we have a steering group, which is a bit unique, I suppose. That model has sort of gone through now to Johnstown and a few other places. But from the very start in Ballyhaise, there was a steering group set up with representatives of the 4 local milk processors, so actual farmer members from the boards, and also industry people, as well as Teagasc education, advisory, research people on that committee. And they kind of direct us to a certain degree. And from the very outset, that profitability thing was, it was a big thing. Look at the average guy in the region, you're probably talking about, at the time, back in 2005, it was probably 30 hectares of platform, fragmented farms, and basically the systems that we were looking at from the very start to have to be profitable within those constraints, I suppose. The new, I suppose, and we'll talk about this in a more depth, but look, the new trial is looking at establishing clovers on our type of soils and reducing environmental impact. Look, this is just to say that this is the first principles, or pretty much everything. We generally run 3 to 4 year systems trials. As I said, all those different things we looked at, calving pattern, stocking rate, all those different elements. Essentially, they all come back into this basic model that we're trying to follow. So, calving the cows compactly in spring to utilize the grass, as much grass as we can. And look at this growth rate we have. I suppose where we're different from Moore Park is spring growth is a little bit slower to take off. In the autumn, it tails off quite a bit, but generally speaking, mid-season, we rarely suffer from drought. So 2018 is the only real year I remember where it was, a real impact. So, and I think even at that, the lowest we dropped to was 40 kilos, whereas farms, even an hour east of there, were down at 10, 15 kilos. So it's it's not actually rainfall, it's just the difference in soil type. So because we've got heavier soils, generally speaking, soil moisture deficit isn't the problem. The opposite is usually the issue. So, but basically, you know, everything we've done heretofore and even in the new trial, it ties back into that model. Look at just big picture. John might have talked through a bit of this stuff last week in terms of the farm, but this is the whole farm in Ballyhaise. We're a cog in the wheel, essentially. So we're, you know, one enterprise among many. So there's dry stock sheep, forestry. So there's 145 hectares. And of that, we're now farming 56 hectares of platform and 6 hectares of an outblock. So I'm not sure if you can see the cursor, but basically this is the dairy platform here. It's kind of sitting in the middle of the college, and then you've got beef to one side and kind of sheep to the other side. Just one thing to notice, I suppose, a physical thing on the farm is that you know, we've got a fairly substantial river running through the farm, the Annalee, which does flood at times. So there's parts of our land that is prone to flooding, which, you know, causes challenges in certain ways. Generally speaking, it looks lovely and flat on the page. It's not flat. You'll see a few pictures in a minute. So look at fairly undulating ground, pretty typical of the area. And, you know, typical again of drumlin soils, there's a mix and mash of everything. We've got peat soils, we've got alluvials, we've got alluvial glaze, and then, you know, we've got brown podzolic, but a big mixture in terms of soil type. So some parts of the farm in dry weather perform really well, and in wet weather perform really badly. But in general, look at, I would say 70–80% of it is good land for the area, very good land for the area, and then we've got 20–25% more difficult. Yeah, in terms of the grass production, look at the average is 14 tonnes. We've been at it a long time now. So since 2005, we've got to 40 measures a year, every year since 2005. So we can put a very good handle on, you know, how much we can grow and how it grows. So as I said, one of the differences here is you know, it's later in spring, and we kind of know that we have to change some things to account for that. But 14 tonnes, so it's not far off the production that, you know, a lot of people are getting further south. So it's not, utilising it might be a bit more difficult, but we can grow good tonnage grass. Just in terms of the herd and the herd performance, look at the spring calving herd. This year we're making 120 cows, plans to go to 140 next year. More land has come into the system. In terms of, we'd be strong on our percentages. You know, over the last good number of years, we've been pretty good on the fertility side of it. You know, our output 470 per cow. It's not, there's lots of people in the area doing a lot higher than that. But look at, we wouldn't have been putting in big levels of concentrate. So look at, I suppose when I started, we're doing 370 kilos of solids. The aim was to get to 450, and we get to 450 now. The aim is to get to 500 on sort of 600–700 kilos of meal. So that's kind of the target. But look at, in terms of the herd, good levels of fat and protein percentages are good. Again, there's people in the area beating us, but we're fairly pretty much up there. Production, we'd like to get above that 500 kilos. Yeah, so that's it. So that's just, I suppose, a quick run through in terms of the farm and the type of work we do. And we'll spend most of our time on this, the current trial. So as I said, we have a steering group who we meet usually once a year, sometimes twice a year, depending. But we met them in 2020. We were after doing a trial looking at grazing season length. And it was pretty obvious that, you know, and this is well before €1,000 a tonne for fertiliser. From an environmental point of view, an environmental impact point of view, it was pretty clear that we were going to need to do something in terms of clover, establishing clover on the farm. Now, I suppose a bit of a reluctance, maybe possibly on my own part, that kind of thought, Jesus, on our soil type, is it going to work? And that's kind of the question that we set ourselves from the beginning of last year. So just to run through this, I suppose, it's a 5-year trial, and I'll explain in a few minutes why that's important, that we're going to run it over a fairly long period of time. The big idea on this is to try and reduce purchased end surplus, so through both feed and fertilizer. So you'll see that in the different treatments or different groups. And essentially, you know, initially, when we were planning this out, we sort of said we were going to do 10% reseeding with clover included in the mix, and we were going to do another 10% oversow. And when we met our steering group said, no, that's going to take too long. We want to learn about the process quickly. So look at front load it and measure what happens. And that's what we sort of decided to do. So it's something that's maybe unique enough about the trial is that, we're actually measuring the messy bit, if you want to put it that way, that we're looking at, starting from a standing start with no clover in our swards, and we're trying to, get to 80, well, ideally 100% of the area, but in reality, 70, 80% with that good 20, 25% clover in the sward. So that's where we're trying to get to. And we're going to front load that, as you'll see in a few minutes. We've front loaded it in the first couple of years, and we'll measure what impact that had, because that has had fairly stark impacts. The target is to cut the nitrogen surplus by 50% we'll say from one extreme to the other over the 3 years. So that's a fairly significant target. And I suppose this is the big thing, looking at the clover establishment on our soil type, which we never really thought was going to be an issue. The second one there, the persistence, that's the real big question. And it's the one farmers throw at me every time we get discussion groups in to say, look, I had clover, but 2 years after it was gone. So the persistence of clover in the sward, and then I suppose we want to look at the impact it has on the animal, the pasture performance, how much grass or pasture we can grow. I have to stop saying grass. And feed self-sufficiency. So, can we feed the herd within that? So initially, when we started up, these are our 4 treatments. We had basically the stocking rate the same across all of them. To one extreme, it's look at 1.2 ton concentrate per cow. No effort made to establish clover whatsoever. Look at, we'll keep spreading our nitrogen, or 250 kilos of N, that's it. We're going to feed 1.2 ton. So I suppose for the area, that's higher than we've ever fed. But for the area we're in, and probably nationally, it's pretty much where a lot of guys are at in terms of feed input. So I suppose from that, we're reducing we can reduce concentrate. So group number 2 here is grass swards, low concentrate. So 600 kilos of concentrate, stocking rate stays the same, nitrogen input stays the same. And then our clover treatment. So this is where we aim to get to after year 3. So look at, again, 1.2 ton of concentrate, trying to get clover into all the farm if we can at a good enough rate to reduce nitrogen down to 100, 125 kilos of N. And then you can do the 2. So I suppose you can look at if I want to reduce N surplus, I can just cut the feed. I can do that tomorrow. I can keep feeding the cows the same level of concentrate and get clover in. That's for us 3 years, probably of commercial farm a lot longer, or I can do both. So I suppose this is just a different way of looking at it, but that's sort of showing you your nitrogen surplus. So if you're feeding 1.2 ton of concentrate and 250 kilos of N, it's up on, it's 325 kilos of N inputs. And if you take everything back off that, so look at reducing the concentrates, a 12% reduction, leaving the concentrate the same, and incorporating clover and reducing nitrogen is 38%. And if we do both, it's 51%. Now that that's the plan, but this only works if we can get the clover established, and if we can get it established, and if it persists, I suppose, which I said the big thing. So we know the benefits from previous trials in other places, and we wouldn't expect that to be any different in Valley Hayes. Look at, if we get it in there, we can cut nitrogen out of the system. We can also expect a bit of a bump in cow performance, but the big thing is keeping it there, I suppose. So this is just, I suppose, the plan that we came up with at the start, and pretty much what we've done in year 1 and 2, a 3-year transition to clover. Now this, I have to give a health warning here, this is not advisable at commercial farm level, and we'll see why in a minute. But basically from our point of view was to do it up front, and we'll measure persistence and performance from there on. So look at front loading the reseeding and oversowing year 1 and 3. So you can see year 1 and 2, So the green is the reseed, the blue is the oversow, and the orange is, you know, in theory, the total, if it all works, which it won't all work. But so year one, year 1 and 2, we did 25% reseeding in year 1, and 20%, I think it ended up around with 20% oversowing in year 1. Year 2, it's 25% reseeding and 15-20% oversowing again. And then by year 3, we're back to almost normal levels of 10-15% of each. So that's kind of, it's as I say, very high levels of reseeding in year 1 and 2, and it's, you know, it's had effects, obviously, what you'd expect, pulling that much area out of the system. So that's just a picture actually from this year, probably in early May. So in the period where you'd normally be closing area up for silage, we had 25% out for reseeding, and we did the same last year. So we actually, in the first half of the year, we were heavily stocked, and then in the second half, we were, you know, nearly overstocked in the first half of the year, and then in the second half of the year, when all that ground came back in, we were understocked. So we ended up taking a good bit of silage sort of from July, August on to September. But that's the starting point, and that's what we're trying to do. So as I said, look, we went about the establishment 2 different ways, full reseeding, and I think it was important from the outset that we tried to do that, the 2 different options, and, you know, measure them through and see the success of it over time, you know, over a number of years. So that's what we wanted to do, to try and learn as much as we could about it. So full reseed establishment. So this is from 2021. You know, basically we did it in May and June. So we kind of done it in 2 separate blocks, and to a degree that was a mistake. We said we wouldn't do that this year, and we spread everything off in one go, and we still ended up doing it in 2 blocks because the weather it got so wet, we just couldn't get it all done. Look at the method for the full reseed is power harrow basically, and sow into it. And in terms of management after that, look, it got 3 bags of 10-10-20 at sowing, got 1 bag of 10-20 in August, sprayed with Clover Max 5 weeks out, and then grazed at 1,200 kilos or less after. So basically, that's just a couple of pictures of two examples that, you know, now we took the approach of 0 nitrogen after sowing, and I suppose the reason we did that is, again, because of the soil type we're on, we felt persistence is going to be the problem, so we give it the best chance we possibly can. So we did get good establishment last year. How much of that was a year effect, I don't know, because I'd say last year was a perfect year for establishment. We might do exactly the same thing this year, and it might work as well. But look, we got very good establishment on our full reseeds. The oversown paddocks then, look, they were all done in May. Initially, when we started out, we intended to cut them for silage and oversow into that, but that didn't happen because we had so much ground closed out for reseeding, we couldn't afford to. We didn't have surplus to take, so we said, look, we'll do it after grazing, and that's what we did. So good tight grazing went in. So the machine we used was the lads, you know, in the college here have it, so we done it in house. It's a rakeman machine. It's basically, it broadcasts the seed, and there's times that give it a very light run. You know, you wouldn't even know it was done afterwards. Again, look at Chieftain and Crusader, and we managed them, look at pretty much the same as our reseeds, apart from the fact that we went in and grazed them at even lower covers. We were grazing them 700-800 covers at times to try and encourage the clover plant to come through. So I suppose the difficulty with this option is that there's an established ryegrass plant there that's been getting nitrogen for the last 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And then look, we went in and we pulled the nitrogen off it, and to give the clover a chance to establish. Now, I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do. We did get good establishment, but we went through 2 or 3 rotations of very, very difficult grass management. Grass quality was very poor. So look, there's other people taking a different approach on that, and I'm not sure which is right, but we definitely got good establishment. So 80-85% of the area that we oversowed, and we did a good chunk of area. We have some clover in it today, or good clover, I would say. There was 1 paddock that just was a complete failure. And from talking to other people who do it, that's normal enough. Definitely last back end when we did it, look at the clover contents, you can see it here. In comparison to the reseeds, they were quite close together, or there wasn't as much variation, if you want to put it that way, whereas on our oversowing there was more. So this one was too much clover. There was 65% clover in it that was in autumn last year, and this one was 25%, but quite patchy and not well dispersed. Now that one, we actually done cuts on that yesterday. There's 30-35% clover in it now, but definitely last year there was more variation. So this is a reseed paddock, I suppose, just how it looks today. So that's from 2 weeks ago. That's a reseed paddock that we did last year, been grazed. And look at, there's good clover contents in that. There's up on 35%, I think, was in that when we did the cuts. The performance today, and look at, this is again a health warning, it's early days, but this is the reseeded and oversown swards that we did last year, for 2022, how they performed year to date 2022. So our grass reseeds, sorry, I didn't mention that. That's one thing that we did, is we did the same area of reseeding across all the treatments, even our grass only treatments. And the reason we did that is because we didn't want to end up comparing newly reseeded grass clover swards against older grass swards. So comparing like with like, year to date, our grass reseeds from last year have grown 7.6 tons. They've got 150 kilos of chemical N. Our clover reseeds have grown the same with 56 kilos of N, and our clover oversown have grown the same with 60 kilos of N. So look at, I was a bit pessimistic about this in the past, but looking at it now, I'm becoming more positive and more positive. But the big question is, can we maintain that? If we can maintain that level of performance over a few years, look at, definitely from an environmental point of view, it's going to have a big impact. But also, obviously, which is even more so this year, in terms of the economics end of it as well. So look at, that's just in terms of the clover contents, what has happened, which you kind of would expect. Clover contents was high in October last year, dropped back down in March. Now, this is the average of the oversown and the average of the reseeds. So there's obviously variation in here. So the poorest of our reseeds is probably down at 5 or 6% at that stage. Our oversown paddocks, the poorest was 0, but and that's included in this average. So look at, I suppose, what you would expect to happen, it's come back up. But from that, you'd look at it and you'd say, look at, the oversown has worked quite well in that there's as much or slightly more maybe clover in them than there is in the reseed. So that's something that we want to follow through, for the next couple of years. And probably going forward, talking to people who, I'm new enough at the clover game, but talking to people who's had along with me, the oversown, I'd say, is going to be it's going to be the thing that's going to be used to keep clover in swards, because that's something that we haven't really been doing up until the last couple of years, where we'd establish it in the reseed, it would disappear and then we just kind of let it go. But going forward, I think we need to make maybe more of an effort to if it's dropped, if the clover content drops, we're going to have to go in and do something about it. So we actually have done that this year, even on some of the ones we did last year. We've gone in and given them a second chance in terms of oversown. So in terms of the contents, just we're not visually assessing these. These are actual measurements where we're doing clips on every rotation on every paddock and separating them. So it's not me saying there's 20% or 25%. It's what weighed out. It's a proper measurement. And just look at, in terms of the system performance last year, there's a couple of things from this. Look at in terms of the performance per cow was actually quite good. The tonnage of grass grown, well back on what you would expect, or our long-term average of 14 tonne. But when you look at it over taking out 25% of your area for reseeding, that would be to be expected. And that feeds through, I suppose, to this figure down at the bottom of silage conserved. So generally speaking, at 2.5 cows to the hectare, we'll make 85-90% of our winter feed at that stocking rate. Last year, it was from 50% down to 30%, depending on the treatment. So that's why I said at the start, it's not recommended at a commercial farm level if you're running at a high stocking rate already. So if you're a lower stocking rate, that's a different issue. And look at, just in summary, don't know how I am on time there, but in summary, look at establishing clover. It's a long-term project. I think, and I've seen cases of this in the last year or so, with the way fertilizer prices are. People have run in and tried to do big areas, and look at what we've kind of learned about it is you need to preferentially manage them, particularly the oversown swards. And if you're trying to do a massive area, that's just not going to happen. So I think you view it as a longer term project, and you know, you do a bit every year and try and preferentially treat them as best you can. Establishment was good in 21. Was that a year effect? I don't know, but we'll find that out. A 3-year program, it's not realistic at the stocking rates we're talking about. I do know some commercial guys at lower stocking rates or who have surplus silage and they want to get there a bit quicker. You know, if you're down to 2 cows to the hectare or below, you know, that's doable. It's doable to do it at that rate. But you know, if you're rating up above that, you know, I'd be saying you reduce the percentage. So 10% reseeds, 10% oversown is realistic, or maybe you could go a little bit more. As I said, to date, they've performed well and they're growing similar levels of pasture with less N. One point in that is they do look different. And for someone who's used to spreading quite a bit of nitrogen over the years, it's hard to get your head around. You look at them, they look pale, and you know, you're kind of going, geez, did they need a little bit of nitrogen? It's a thing. Look at if you're new into it, I would say look at your tonnages to date. If you're measuring grass regularly, look at your tonnages to date. Keep a good record on what nitrogen fertilizer goes out on them, rather than just looking at the color. If you look at the color, you know, 8 out of 10 plants will go with fertilizer on them, I would say. So maintaining the clover and the sward is going to be the challenge in our soil type, but there is big potential there to reduce inputs if we can manage to do that. So that's me.
Thanks very much, Donal. That was really good practical overview of what's happening up in Ballyhaise. So we've lots of questions coming through there. We'll get to those in a moment, but do keep your questions coming using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen there. Donal, you spoke a lot about the obviously the various challenges you've had with clover. What would you say would be the single biggest challenge that you've had there in sustaining the clover?
The single biggest challenge, Mark, from what we did, and as I said, I'm not sure if the way we did it was the right way, but the single biggest challenge we saw was with our oversown sward was grass quality. So, and it was really interesting because we had full reseeds, you know, on one part of the farm, and another part of the farm we had oversown swards, and then we had within that block we had swards that were just, you know, they were established grass, but we didn't put clover into them, and they were getting nitrogen as normal. So we could see sort of week on week, day on day, we could see the variation across them. The reseeds always looked well. Like even when we pulled the nitrogen, they did look pale, but they always looked well, grazed well, and the cows were happy on them. The clover reseeds, the oversown swards, and the way we did it, they definitely did not look well. They didn't graze well, and the cows were unsettled on them. And the only way we could get round that was to go in at very low cover. So at times we were going in at, as I said, 800 cover, because if we let go to 1012, there was part of the pasture was just unutilizable. So and the challenge, and I suppose this is the thing about doing systems research as opposed to just trialing something on one individual paddock. Within the constraints of that system, we had 25% of our area out for reseed, so we couldn't afford to take surplus off that area. So by the time we got to August, there was a portion of the farm, there was 20% of those clover treatments that grass quality was very, very poor on. So that, to me, that's the biggest challenge, and I would say 95% of commercial farmers in that situation would have put nitrogen on, and I wouldn't blame them, because you know it definitely would have had an impact.
Related to all of this, of course, is the nitrates directive, and that, you know, has been recently revised. What do you see as the impacts there in that part of the country with the new nitrates regulation, particularly around?
Well, sure. Look, at talking to guys, Mark, and it's wouldn't be fully my area, but talking to commercial guys coming in, you know, there's individual people there who are going to be pretty heavily impacted if they're up on the high bracket, so very high milk yields, and they're heavily stocked. And there is, look at the average guy, it's not going to have a huge impact because the stocking rates are low and the yields aren't particularly high. I don't know, the average for the area is probably 5, 6 litres, something like that. But there's a portion, I don't know the percentage, but there could be 10% of guys who basically they're going to have to possibly drop cow numbers or get more land into the system. So that's the biggest one that I would see. Also, the reduction, if there's reduction coming in chemical N, we've been used to that level of nitrogen. We've developed a system that's profitable and that's relatively simple and it's easy to run, and that's why people have taken that on over the years, and it's worked really well for them. So it's like everything else. I'd be the same myself. It's hard to change sometimes.
Yeah.
When you take this clover thing on, to be honest, I'd have been a bit pessimistic about it. I'm more optimistic now than I would have been, but it's just a big change. When you're used to running that system, it's a big change. I
suppose that is one of the rationales for the Signpost program, is to support farmers in that transition to lower carbon systems, including reduced nitrogen.
I would say on that, Mark, that I would see it even among farmers, who do a good bit of work with groups and stuff. The attitude towards it has definitely changed. There's more and more of the early adopters, and lots of people, in all different systems, who are saying, look, we'll give it a go. And what's the worst that can happen? Whereas maybe 5-6 years ago was kind of, that's clover's not really for me. I do see that there's a sea change in people's attitude, and there's a lot of people there willing to, and we have a few monitor farmers that were linked with people within the Signpost program as well, and people are doing different things, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think people are trying different approaches, and that can only be good.
I can't help but to ask the question. I mean, there's a very significant river there going through the college there.
There's actually a comment there, Mark, from the EPA, believe it or not, saying, well done, Ballyhaise, because downstream from the farm shows that the water quality is very good. The status is good. So that's obviously a positive.
Yeah, because I was actually looking at the water maps while you were talking there, Donal, and I was seeing green all over the place there. So you're obviously doing something right there to reduce any nutrient surpluses.
I honestly think, though, on that, and I've chatted to Donal Kennedy, our HACCP advisor on this, and John as well, really the slurry management, Mark, is the thing there, and it's something we've improved on in the last while with investment in infrastructure and stuff, slurry storage. There's lots of people in the area where it comes to the 1st of February and tanks are full, and sometimes there's slurry going out from it, and I think that's an issue. It's definitely an issue that we've improved on, and I think it's an issue a lot of farmers have invested big money into to try and improve, because from two points of view, from the water quality point of view, but the way we're looking at it as well is the way we can utilize our slurry now compared to 10-15 years ago is much improved. We're able to actually we'll wait for a month. We'll wait till the 1st of March, we'll wait till the 10th of March, and we'll go to where it needs it rather than we need to get tanks emptied. So I think that's a big thing.
Valuable resource.
Yeah, and farmers are investing heavily in that, and I think that's to be commended.
That leads into one of the main questions that's coming in, is around your soil fertility, and how is the soil fertility on the farm, and have you noticed any impact of strike rates, I guess, whether oversowing or whether reseeding dependent on soil fertility?
Well, look at Padraig, as is a problem, and it's not a problem, but it is a problem in a way. In the Teagasc farms, we've inherited farms with very good soil fertility. Soil fertility in Ballyhaise, P's and K's have always been quite good. P's in particular are always very good. K's, it's a place where we mucked up a little bit in the early years, because we changed our grazing system, and I've seen it happen on commercial farms too. We've changed our grazing system from, we'll graze 2,500 covers and go in and top it, to we'll skip that and we'll take it out as surplus bales. And definitely in the early years, K, we were having trouble with K, and then we weren't utilising the slurry properly. So in general, I didn't put it on it there, but I suppose I should have had it on it. The soil fertility, everything is I'd say 90% of the area is good for everything. The one thing is the lime, and we're guilty of it too. Farmers, it happens on farms and it happens within Teagasc, particularly on our soil type as well. The lime is something that we need to be at every year. There was a couple of years there where we missed, or just didn't do it. And now I'm not saying we had 5.6s, but we had lots of our area at the beginning of last year down at maybe 6.1. That needed a bit, so we went out. We've done a lot of lime last year,
and that'll pinch over,
Yeah, exactly. Pinch clover, big time. So now, even this year, the area that we received it this year, it was fine for lime, but we were doing that. We sprayed it off and we put a ton of lime on it.
You mentioned there, Donal, going in at the covers of 1,000 that you had grass that wasn't utilised. What did you do with that grass that wasn't utilised? Just go in at the topper, or?
Well, the fact we went in with low covers, it reduced it as much. We didn't end up doing much topping. When the clover kicked in, and you could see it starting to green. And this is my big point about the year effect part. The fact that last back end really suited our farm, because if it had been a back end like 2017, God knows what it would have been like. But the fact it was so dry, it actually suited our soil type. So we might have topped a couple of paddocks that were really bad. It wasn't that we went round all the area that was oversold and topped it at that stage. And then the other thing is, when we got our reseeded area back in, we had scope to take some of them out as surplus later on.
The pale colour that you mentioned it a couple of times, and there's lots of questions in here about it. Did you see a pinch in the tank afterwards when cows would have grazed that? We like letting cows in a nice lush green grass.
Yeah, no, not really, no. And but I suppose the thing is that, and people have asked that thing on the yield end of it, because and maybe I didn't do a great job of explaining that, our clover treatments, Padraig, started off last year with no clover on them. Okay, so it was really September before those cows were actually grazing clover swards. Now this year there's 40% of the area, so every second paddock or thereabouts could have clover or some level of clover in it. So it's only probably now we're going to see that impact. The one thing I suppose Barry would have said to me, he felt he had issues maybe, or felt that on some of those clover paddocks he felt they were getting it hard to graze it, or cows were a little bit unsettled on it. Now, whether that's that they're just not used to eating swards with a good bit of clover in them, I don't know. But no, it didn't see it. It's just a visual thing when you look at it. We even had the group. Yeah, we had a group in there last week, and we were standing back up at one side of the farm. We were looking across, and there was two paddocks that was reseeded last year. One of grass only, one of grass clover. We looked across, and the one with the grass only one was lovely green, or what we perceive in our head as lovely green sward. The other one looked pale. You'd think from a distance looking at it was mid-rotation. We went over and we walked through them. There was 1,300 or 1,400 cover on both of them.
Right. Yeah. And have you taken any samples and looked at the nitrogen in the actual content of the crop?
No, we haven't done that yet. No.
Okay. Look, there's lots of positive comments coming in, but there's one question here, and we have to ask the hard ones as well. Why weren't Ballyhays and you looking at clover now, or what was?
Well, I suppose that's one we get, Padraig. Yeah, absolutely, that's one we get. Initially, when we started off, the thing was utilising, growing grass and utilising grass, and actually the last trial we did, to a degree, is probably the first trial we should have done, where we actually looked at an extended grazing treatment versus an average. So average for the region is 205 days, which is basically you turn the cows out around about the 20th of March and they come back in the 20th of October. And it's interesting when you look at, so we did that, we actually did that, and we compared it then to turning the cows out, as the calves on the 10th or 15th of February and keeping them out till the 10th of November. So we're limited, as I always say in this type of stuff, we're kind of limited to focusing on one thing at a time. Now, we did try to establish a bit of clover, even as part of that trial, but to be honest with you, and I think it's similar enough to farmer experience, we weren't focused on it, and we weren't managing it any differently. We just look at it's in the bag and we put in the clover. We didn't actually manage it. So look, I'd take that as I'd take the criticism on the chin. We are a bit late to the party, but better late than never.
But at least you came to the party. That's number one. Yeah.
Whether I'll stay in the party, I don't know.
Stay there, and that's the next question. Staying there. Persistence of clover. Are we right in saying one of the questions here is my understanding that persistence is better when it's oversown? And if that is the case, what's the best method that you've come across of oversowing?
Persistence is better when it's oversown. No, I wouldn't be saying that at all. Well, I don't know yet, but looking at it from the outset, I'd say the reseed is a better method of establishment. The problem with the reseed is, look, you can't do what we did. You can't take 25% of your area out and reseed it unless you're availably stocked. So if you can only reseed 10% a year, and you're only using reseed and not oversowing, by the time you get round, it'll be like the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you get to one end, it's time to go back to the other. There'll be nothing in it. So where we see the oversowing is, Padraig, is a way of topping up. And now we haven't done this yet because, well, we did 2 paddocks this year of a top up, but that's where we would see the oversown. But we also wanted to try it as a way of accelerating the process. So the oversown for us at the start is, look, we'll do our 20% reseeding. Or if somebody was starting at commercial farm level and they were doing their 10% reseeding, instead of just doing 10%, look, we'll try and oversow another 10% as well. It's 20% a year. So 4 or 5 years down the road, you should be getting to a point where you've at least tried on a good portion of your area. But persistence is going to be, and we're way too early. We're way too early to answer that one on our soil type, and because look at the reality is, the grazing conditions for us, like, I said there about the extended grazing versus average, the basic difference in that trial, extended versus average, was on-off grazing. So we'll generally turn the cows out in 10th, 15th of February, and we'll be on-off grazing until Paddy's Day, pretty much. We just don't leave them out because they're going to do too much harm, unless it's really, really good weather. And then the same on the back end, it'll be 15, 20 days where you're on-off grazing at different periods of time. So the grazing conditions, look, I'd be up and down to Moore Park on a fairly regular, or have been over the years, and maybe not so much the last couple of years, but I've gone out at periods of time in February and I've looked at what the grazing conditions is like there versus us. And it's in that period of time, it's different. So that's where I would be a bit afraid of our clover swards, because they're definitely more open. They look more open and you'd be worried about them. Now, we grazed them this year, the ones that were established last year, and we did some bits of damage and it didn't seem to do a big pile of harm. But if you're doing that consistently over maybe 5 or 6 years, will it have an impact? I don't know. Look, at 10 years ago, people in Cavan were saying if you do that to grass wards, they'll disappear, and they didn't. So
yeah, it's a mindset.
That's the big question.
From a management, or from a cow management perspective, you're going from paddocks that have high density of clover, 20%, to some that have none. How are you managing that, or what's the attitude of farm staff even letting cows out in high clover swards like that? There's always a risk of bloat, and you always hear the story of.
Look at the bloat is an issue, and again, I'll probably say, we've no problems, and tomorrow we'll have a cow with bloat, like, so we're early enough on. We're only at the point, I suppose, now, Padraig, from now on, where clover contents is getting up, and again, I'm being directed by the people who have more experience in this than me, who sort of saying, look, if it was below 30%, 35%, it shouldn't be an issue. But sometimes it is, like, for particular reasons. And exactly what you said there, it's a particular risk for ourselves, because we are going from, and we will be doing that this year and probably next year as well. So basically last year, from a preventative point of view, what we did was, anywhere where there was a lot of clover, we were probably a month earlier with our strip wire. So generally speaking, it's kind of the mid-September, when covers are getting really heavy, where we go in with our 12-hour wire. Whereas on our clover treatments, not on the paddocks and the clover treatments, but there was a lot of clover, we were probably in a month earlier with our strip wire. That's what we did. Now this year, we've bought a couple of the dispensers for bloat Highland from now on. And I was sort of saying to Barry, we probably should just, because we've got 4 different groups of cows going around, so we've different color collars, we'll just, with the clover groups, even if there's no clover in the paddock, we'll leave the dispensers in and just keep moving it around with the groups of cows.
And you haven't done anything like putting out straw or anything like that, just to increase fiber?
No, not yet. Now, whether we have to do that later on in the year, people are sort of telling me that maybe it's later on, sort of September, October, when maybe you get over that peak of farm covers are getting a bit lighter and you get into wet weather, the bloat oil, maybe cows not drinking as much and all that sort of stuff. So look,
Donal, we have a few Donal, just a few comments coming through there around the slurry comments that you made there about the importance of good slurry storage, and a lot of expert comments agreeing with what you said there, that having good storage is critical to improving water quality, and that the timely spreading of slurry that is coming from our ACP program.
Just one on that, Mark, as well, which I think can be overlooked a little bit. The contractors have a difficult job, like, you know, and I'd say it'd be a good experience for some people to put in a day or two with a contractor at that time of year, because everybody wants to get slurry out. You know, it has to be dry, you know, for 2 or 3 days or whatever. They have a workload ahead of them. So it's a difficult task for contractors to do all that and manage it correctly. You know what I mean? There's a lot of slurry has to go out, and sometimes the windows of opportunity are quite small. So for the farmer to have the extra storage, it means instead of ringing the contractor and saying, I need you here in the next 2 hours, you can say, look, get to me in the next 2 weeks. Like
that is a challenging time for contractors. Any window of good weather, the phone is hopping. I've seen that. Just in terms of the costings, Donal, what were the costs of oversowing, and how do they compare to saving in nitrogen use, or is it too early to say that at this stage?
It's too early, because we don't know those savings if they're going to persist through. Look, in general, we did the oversowing actually in-house. So, but talking to farmers, I know last year, depending on the process used, you know, some people are doing it for 30 euros an acre, some people are paying 60 euros an acre. That's just for the contracting charge. Some people are doing, like what you were saying earlier on, the spreader with 0730, and they're doing it for nothing. Some people are putting it through slurry tankers and doing it for nothing. So in the oversow one, Mark, the cost isn't prohibitive. It's the management after, and that's what I sort of saw last year, is that I could absolutely see where, you know, if you did what we did after 2 or 3 rounds, you'd either throw your hat at it or whatever, and the clover just wouldn't get a chance. The cost of the oversowing to me isn't, it's in comparison to the cost of some things we do, it's small. Now reseeding's a different prospect. Like reseeding, look, at you're into, what was the old figure, 250 an acre? I don't know what, I didn't even work it out this year what it is, but when you count the fertilizer and contractor, God knows, it could be double that or close to. So the reseeding, and then you don't have that area in. So there's pluses and minuses, but I don't think the cost is prohibitive if we can get the oversowing to work, I don't think the cost is the big issue.
I think that the work that they've done in Salahead has really been proven. That work has been around for a long time. Just to address some of those questions that people are asking about, the stage at which we're at adopting clover in Ballyhaise might be a little bit later, but certainly Salahead, that work has been ongoing for many years, and the costings have really stacked up there. I think, in fact, they're operating a zero nitrogen study at the moment there as well, which is showing very positive results. Yeah,
and getting 15 tons by doing it.
Indeed,
and that's, I suppose, for us, that's the big challenge, is that we could do all this and we could end up growing 10 ton or 11 ton or 12 ton, and then you have to go back to the drawing board. The big question is, now, as I said, it looks positive this year from this, but we're only halfway through year 1 of those swords. It's what they'll be like, as the lad said there, in year 3, 4 and 5.
Have you looked at multi-species?
No, we're going to be late to that party as well.
Look, as long as you have the invitation.
They're always late. We're always last.
There's a lot of questions. Obviously, there's farmers tuned in this morning, which is great, because there are genuine questions about cost savings and what you reckon you've saved this year. And obviously, on the road to saving that is when you stop spreading nitrogen from the bag. At what stage of the year do you stop spreading nitrogen on the clover swards?
Yeah, well, look at, again, there's a bit of debate around this one, but the approach we took was we treated them as normal PORIC up until kind of April time. There was 1 or 2 of them got a bit of fertilizer in April, but pretty much they got the first round as normal, either slurry or urea, which for us this year was late. It was the first week of March, just weather conditions in February you couldn't get out, and it wouldn't have been sensible to go out. So it got its first round, and then it got its second round, which probably ended up, instead of Paddy's Day, it was late March, because we were late with the first round. And after that, then, so that picture I put up of the cows grazing, like, that sward hasn't got nitrogen since early April. No.
At all?
No.
Even dairy washings or anything?
Some of them might have got bits of washings and slurry. That one hasn't got any though. No.
And are you still spreading compounds then on them?
We haven't this year yet, but we're limited enough on the amount of pea we can put out, Padraig, because most of the swards are index 3s and 4s. So what we're sort of going to do is just go with muriate at a low level, because I'm told that's a big risk from the bloat point of view. Yeah. So 10, 15 units or whatever of K, and we'll do that this month, and maybe again in September.
Okay, we are just up on time, Donal, and huge level of positive comments coming through from people in terms of your presentation. Of course, that's really just a taster of what's available for next Wednesday at the open day in Ballyhaise. So a reminder to everybody that event starts at 10 o'clock. People would want to be arriving between 10 and 11 or so. Donal, is that sort of the window?
Yeah.
And that's taking place in Ballyhaise Agricultural College, and full details are available on the Teagasc website. And the overall theme is future-proofing Irish dairying. So definitely an event to get along to, just to find out what's going on, the latest in Ballyhaise. And just to let you know that next week we're going to be joined by Thomas Ryan, who's Senior Sustainability Manager with Glanbia, and he'll be discussing the Glanbia's Ireland's Living Proof Sustainability Strategy. That's next Friday. So it just remains for me to say thanks very much to everybody for joining us this morning. Thank you to Yvonne Maher in the background, who's been helping with the technical side this morning. Padraig, thanks very much for helping with the questions. And also thanks to Andy Boland and Pat Murphy for the coordination side. And Donal, last but not least, thanks again for your presentation and your practical tips there at the end as well. It's really that type of practical knowledge that you have is really invaluable. Until next week, thanks for everybody, and we will chat to you soon. You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.